Welcome to Phase Space Invaders. Today we're wrapping up Season 4 with episode number 32, and since it's Biophysics Week at the Biophysical Society, we're doing something special. With the help of Pilar Cosio, my first guest here, who's chairing the Theory and Computation subgroup at the BPS this year, we've assembled a panel of experts to discuss the future of biophysics. We have Robert Best, Chief of the Computational Biophysics section at the National Institutes of Health. We have Sonya Hanson, leading the Structural and Molecular Biophysics group at the Flatiron Institute. And we have Xuhui Huang, chairing Theoretical Chemistry at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Three distinguished guests who all work close to the atomistic level, but look at it from very different angles. Robert has been deeply involved in force field refinement and protein folding. Sonya is at the forefront of augmenting the atomistic interpretation and analysis of cryo-EM data. And Xuhui develops advanced models of molecular kinetics with the use of machine learning and AI techniques. We're touching on many burning questions our field is facing, from the balance between physics and data in AI training and deployment, to education of young scientists, to which experimental techniques might bring about next breakthroughs in theory and computation. We don't have simple answers to most of them, but if we left with more questions than we came with, that's a sign of a successful discussion to me. As per legal requirement, I should point out that the views presented by my guests in this panel are their own and not those of their respective institutions. I do hope we don't say anything that could get my guests into trouble, but we're definitely sharing a lot of opinions here, and if you know anything about scientists, some are opinionated. I hope our conversation not only gets you thinking, but also inspires new initiatives that the community sees as crucial for moving forward. But if you're just tuning in to chill and enjoy a bunch of scientists discussing the future of their field, who am I to tell you what to do? Let's go. Xuhui, Sonya, and Robert, welcome to the panel.
Thank you.
Hello.
Good to be here.
Hello, everyone.
So we are discussing the future of computational and theoretical biophysics here. And maybe it's instructive to look at the last decade for hints of what's to come. And I think it's just kind of striking how much better we've got at connecting different scales in the last decade, thanks to all the data that has been coming. And I mean, biology has this particularly tight coupling between temporal and spatial scales. And I would open the discussion by asking, how is the community addressing this multi-scale challenge that biology poses for us? Do you think there are some gaps that we should more explicitly address or focus on to, more fully understand life as a phenomenon of physics? Sonya, do you want to start as the person who works on maybe the largest assemblies?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now there's not as much research as maybe there could be extending across these different scales. I think we're doing very well at simulating like atomistic molecules, like proteins. But yeah, I think we now have some work on, nanometer scale, hundreds of nanometer scale, potentially microtubules. And we're, even trying to go larger than that. And I think that how to bridge those scales, take the information we know from atomistic simulations to inform us on what's going on in these more mesoscale processes is super important. But I think there's a big gap there. And I think, I'm just kind of learning about like what people are doing in these mesoscale simulations. But I think there's a lot of very cool stuff that could benefit a lot from like our atomistic understanding of things. I think it is exciting, and I think there's a lot that can be done there.
Right, because we're all close to the atomistic level, right? And we probably learn to extrapolate from that to the actual biology, biomedicine. A lot of us probably have connections to medicine and human health, whatnot. But where are we here, Robert?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of brought up something I'm very interested in at the moment, Sonya, which was, really using atomistic simulations to help parameterize more coarse-grained models. And so really underutilized source of information. I mean, I think actually the most successful coarse-grained models, I'm probably going to get into trouble for saying this, are at the moment are the ones that are done top-down, just from experimental information. And that's great. But of course, you're inevitably limited in how complex the model can be because there's only so much resolution you get from experiments. So, it's particularly like one parameter for each amino acid or something like that. And, atomistic simulations are really a huge trove of information on the, detailed length scales of interactions could be mined to make more complex coarse-grained models.
Yeah, and I think that in like existing mesoscale models, my understanding is there's a lot of parameters that you can adjust. And it seems like you want to take as much information as you can possibly get, including from atomistic simulation, to figure out what realistic parameters really should be.
I think I can probably follow up a little bit on this point. So I agree. I think the standard way, if you think about people approach these mesoscale simulations, right? People think about in the old days, people are doing these phenomenological theories. They're using simple analytical model to fit to experimental data. They're convenient, but they often give not good predictions for new systems and basically tell you nothing about the underlying molecular mechanism. On the other hand, as you guys talk about, we have this bottom-up molecular simulation from computational chemistry or biophysics. We can really build up a coarse-graining model, but I don't think it really reached the mesoscale. One promising direction in my mind, we can think about those phase field models where people using chemical engineering continuum models, which can connect coarse-graining model further to the larger scale macroscopic phase transitions in biology or any other cellular scale phenomena.
Right, so we're struggling with transferability, right? This is going to be this kind of predictive versus data-driven challenge of how much can we only explain given the data or learn from the data versus as a community, how much can we drive research with predictive methods? How much can we be the exploratory factor? And it's we should probably ideally do both, but certain things are only working at certain scales and certain things are applicable to all of them. Any thoughts on this?
Well, one thing that makes me think of, right, is, your experiment can only really tell you so much. And I think that, one of the things that's nice about coming from like a atomistic perspective is you can learn, what is the impact of adding a phosphorylation or a post-translational modification that you can do in like a physics-based model, and understanding kind of how these physical interactions can inform your mechanism and understand kind of these more mesoscale phenomena. I think that like going back and forth between these scales, looking at what experiments tell us, looking at how, starting from bottom up coarse graining can like really lead to these insights, I think is, I think balancing also kind of like how to collect the experimental data in this light is also part of the question.
Yeah, I think that's something that's advancing a lot, of course, is high throughput experimental data is getting to be like a lot higher quality, and that can also be useful for parameterizing mesoscale models, just because once you, let's say, scan across a huge space of proteins or whatever biomolecules, that's a lot of data you could potentially use to improve a coarse-grained model. And of course, you could also use it to just train a machine learning an AI model directly and cut out the simulations from the loop entirely, but it can also be used to improve simulations and hopefully get a mechanistic understanding of what's going on.
I actually have a question on this point. What do you guys think about these data-driven versus predictive models? Do we really need physics? If we get enough data, then we can probably build a perfect model. We don't need any physics. Or do you think physics still are important?
I think you at least need like physics to understand the data-based model. I mean, but I think it is really tempting to be like, okay, if we collect enough experiments, if we have enough data, then like we don't need all of this other stuff. But I think that in biology, it's so there's so many things that go into any given phenomena that there's a lot of data there that needs to be collected. So
Yeah, I guess AlphaFold got much better just by assuming that the polymer has to be continuous, right? Maybe that's not very advanced physics, but it's some physics.
Yeah, I agree. I think still the combination of data-driven and the physics-based models still are powerful because we really don't have unlimited.
I think, well,
Yeah, I mean, the more physics that you...
no, sorry, if I can chime in, I think it's a very important question to ask. What should be the prior, what should be the machine learned part, right? Because you can set this question in many different ways. What I was going to ask the question, what are we learning from the fact that bottom up coarse graining models don't really work that well, right? As Robert alluded to before, does it give us any hints at maybe we're getting something wrong, or are we just trying to make things too simple and they're really not simple?
I think, well, the problem is, generally speaking, that they don't generalize, because people maybe train them on, train a very sophisticated model on limited data, and so there's just sort of a certain amount of overfitting, and then when you go to a different system, it's like your performance is terrible. But I think that if one does things in a careful way, it should be possible to avoid that kind of problem. I mean, if you're actively looking at making it generalizable to other problems, and because the thing about the sort of standard learning methods that are out there for training coarse grained models is they're very good at learning, and they'll use all the available parameters to fit what's there, and they call that a model. But there's, of course, the issue of overfitting then arises. So you have to just take appropriate care to avoid that happening.
All right, so regularization matters.
Yeah,
Regularization.
I think that's Robert brought up a very good point. I'm not very expert on this topic, but I was also wondering, currently the bottom-up coarse graining can go up to the modeling of the entire virus. But if you want to even go to larger systems, either enough theoretical framework, like when you go to a continuous model, use phase field-based models, I'm sure people have thought about this. And Robert, maybe you can comment. Have people tried and they failed, and what's the problem there?
Using a continuum-based model for much larger scales.
Yeah, but then you take in parameters from bottom-up coarse graining.
I'm actually not that familiar. I mean, the...
Yeah, we had Zan Schulten on the podcast just 2 episodes ago, so she's doing a lot of work in that direction, which is modeling of an entire cell with a mixture of analytical equations, like master equations, and actual structural Brownian diffusion and so on.
So that was really like a tour de force. Yeah, that was like a tour de force of putting together a lot of really complex computational methods.
Yeah, so we're still stuck at the level of choosing what the AI should learn, right? What the loss function should be, what the regularization should be, what the physical constraint or physical form might be to get it right and to make it generalizable. Am I getting it right, or?
I think often it just depends on what is the question that you want to ask with, right? So I think we're not quite at the stage of making things fully generalizable. I think there's still these questions of like, are you interested in modeling like cell division? Are you interested in modeling other processes where, individual molecules can be very important? And I think understanding what are the important things to capture there, I think is still maybe a little bit of an art. Maybe eventually we'll learn enough about it that it can be generalizable in the future.
Still work for humans in the age of machines. But getting to that, we're probably at the stage where the kind of initial cloud of dust is settling around AI, right? And different flavors of AI. Are we getting to the moment where we can kind of start to evaluate, what will stick and what will fail? What are the challenges and opportunities for computational biophysics research coming from AI? And how does it also differ across different career stages, right? How does it differ from someone who wants to learn biophysics to someone who just wants to study and to do research in biophysics?
I'll start with a little bit of what I think. I think we sort of touched upon this issue in the previous talk, where the predictive model versus data-driven model. I think the real opportunity here for our physicists is not AI replacing physics, but AI working together with physics-based models. So we came from the molecular simulation field. We know in the simulation side, we already have those examples of combining AI with a physics-based model. Right? We can accelerate sampling, learning, connected variables, and do a data analysis. So I think that is a way to move forward, is combining physics with AI.
Right. That's what we would love to see instead of just using AI priors as physics, right, in the end. But are we getting there? Like, what are the pathways to that?
I think a lot of it goes back again to kind of what is the data available, right? So like the success of AlphaFold is heavily based on, the PDB existing. And that took a long time to collect all of those structures. And then I think also another thing important to consider about AlphaFold is that, there was CASP, which had very strong metrics of telling, DeepMind if they were performing well or not at this task. And so I think those two things, the data and the metrics, are, critical to understanding what's next. And I think, at least from my perspective, one thing where like we don't really have the data yet is on like, protein conformational heterogeneity, dynamics, kinetics. Like this is something where like we don't have something like AlphaFold. And I think it's actually such a diverse kind of data set. It's hard to even think about what that might look like. So to me, that's kind of the future is connected to all these different things.
Should we strive to organize more CASP-like competitions in different directions?
I agree with that point. I think we need data set which were shared, standardized, and community maintained. I think maybe there's opportunity for molecular dynamics simulation community where we have been talking about putting together this MD simulation data set as a standard community maintain the data set so we can train machine learning models for protein dynamics. Yeah, that would be something I think I would very much love to see in the near future.
Yeah, this is happening now. So there are now repositories that are starting to treat trajectories just like the PDB treats structures. And I think it's exciting. We still have to come up with very strong ideas for what you can get from dynamics that you cannot get from structure alone, especially if they're short dynamics, I guess.
Well, bioemail, so I think the current active topic will be the community trying to move one step further from AlphaFold to predict structure ensemble. It's not dynamics yet, but those short MD simulation will provide abundant information for us to predict ensemble of the protein structures rather than static ones. I think there are a number of examples recently, like bioemail from Microsoft Research.
Yeah, I know, Sonya, maybe that's overlapping with your expertise there, that cryo-EM data could give us some insights into those subtle proportions or subtle ratios of different conformations coming directly from cryo-EM data, right?
Yeah, this is definitely something that cryo-EM more and more has the capacity to do, is give us these ensembles from an experimental technique. But I think that like cryo-EM isn't the only experimental method that can give us some of this information about these ensembles. And I think that cryo-EM is still quite labor intensive. And so I think thinking about what are like high throughput experimental techniques and can really give us information we would need to understand these processes better, I think is worth thinking about carefully.
Yeah, it's pretty tough because every case where you have a dynamic heterogeneity of structure, you can have so many labels. If you want to use frets, you have to interpret it. If you want to do free energy methods, you have to interpret them. You have to assess convergence, right? So like a lot of those things are very case by case. And I wonder if that's kind of amenable to this machine learning friendly workflows where you have, clean data, same format, a sort of repo where everything can be standardized. Because this looks very tough to me.
Yeah, I think if you can map these observables back to like, what do they mean to your protein structure, then it can be easier because then you're always mapping it back to the same thing. I think even in cryo-EM, we have this issue that often, you get out these volumes that you still have to fit the structure into. And so I think there's every experimental method has like its own thing that it gives you. You need to figure out how to connect those all together. That's quite tricky.
I mean, I guess it's also what time scales. I mean, there's just, fluctuations about the native state. I would like to say relatively trivial. You could do an elastic network model and save yourself a lot of trouble. But I mean, if you're looking at more profound like rearrangements that might occur on a millisecond timescale, I mean, you're not going to see those, and you may not even guess that they would occur in a just unbiased MD simulation. So that's where it's hard to just do a large scale simulation effort unless you're able to really run. I mean, now I guess maybe in the next few years, millisecond timescales will become more commonplace. So clearly that is going to be a possibility. Of course, then you have to worry about the force field.
It's very true that what you can get from a simulation is very contingent on what is available, what kind of movement is available within a given time scale, right? So like that's part of my worry that we're going to get something, but there's no uniformity of heterogeneity that we're generating, right? So like some things will be completely folded for the entire simulations, and some things will actually sample some relevant unfolded folded dynamics. So this is going to be another big challenge, how to disentangle those.
And as soon as you go away from the folded state, then you sort of worry more about how much can you trust the force field in doing that. But
that's another worry.
Can I add one point before we move forward? I was thinking, now we talk about protein dynamics. That's obvious. Next topic. People are working to develop machine learning model for protein dynamics. More broadly, if we think about those physics-based foundation models, now when we talk about large language models, the protein large language model trained on evolution sequence are very useful. And you just need to do a little bit of active learning based on the protein large language model. You can predict a lot of experimental data, different tasks. Can our community build physics-based large language models? We can use molecular dynamics simulation as training data. We can use other thermodynamic data, for example, frequency of mutations, for example, solvation. We can build the large language model based on physical principles. I think that would be a very interesting direction to go, because we're not limited by evolution signal anymore if we do that.
So you mean a model that would be trained on predicting various physical properties the way that large language models predict, I don't know, a missing letter or missing token?
Right. So it's more like learning or embedding. So you input a sequence, you output an embedding, but that embedding is learned based on the physical-based data set. Could be molecular dynamic simulation, could be some other physical properties or thermodynamic properties. So then that will be not limited for the evolution, or that can be combined with evolution data.
That sounds very challenging, but interesting.
Yeah, I think there's this question of how much is encoded in the evolutionary data. Like, is there dynamics in there? You would think that if it's important for a function, there should be some signal, right? But how much can you really learn from it is another question.
Yeah, there was this idea of dynamics floated around a while back, right? So like different signatures that might have different functional meanings, how different parts of molecules correlate and so on. So probably that's one idea.
I think the Sonya's point is very valid. Recent studies show a lot of the protein dynamics are related to function already encoded in the evolutionary signal. So if you want to build the foundation models, I think the better way will be combining those data sets from the physics, from the evolution. That would be more powerful in general.
Yeah, it would be pretty exciting even to predict like flexibility from sequence, right? Or things like that
or predict solubility from sequence.
Yes. I think there were already models trying to do that, and protein solubility enhancers based on language models, but for sure there's going to be a lot of work into that direction because it's so also commercially interesting, right? Could save experimenters a lot of work. But moving a bit beyond physical models, what kind of challenges the, let's say, ChatGPT revolution is putting in front of us?
I think it's certainly, I have to first of all preface this by saying that I don't use ChatGPT, or I've only used it very, very little. But I can see that this sort of LLM-based AI and maybe other kinds of things that may come up in the future to be very powerful tools, like, not like directly in our research, like what we've just been discussing, but indirectly, for example, in writing code. So I guess a problem, we have the opposite problem of software companies that have too many coders. We have like too few coders. generally speaking, in academic research. And so if it was possible, if AI is able to help in writing code, then it could mean it would make it more feasible to make, larger, more robust academic software packages rather than, what we have now, which is held together with some chewing gum and stuff. So that's one thing I can definitely see. But I'm just saying, I wouldn't, first of all, at the moment, trust any code that was produced by AI without checking it myself. But it seems to be very powerful at doing that. The other thing is, it seems to be very good at doing math. It's like amazingly good. And so I suppose that you could imagine in the future people might use it as a sort of a tool like they, not currently use mathematics or something. And then, of course, there's writing, which is maybe what everyone's been thinking about, like writing papers, writing grants, and so on. And I'm very averse to using it for those sort of things because I like to, something I enjoy doing is writing paper myself. But I suppose that people are using it more and more, I think.
I'm more optimistic about this point. So I was teaching the undergraduate machine learning in chemistry class in my department. And I have my homework, which are coding homework I assign to students. Many of them try to use ChatGPT to write the code. So unfortunately, the successful rate without any prompting or fine-tuning, it's like 20%. You always have bugs. I think the way to go will be this AI agent, where you couple the large language model with a reasoning agent, execution agent, where you can automate, as Robert mentioned, you can automate part of your workflow, right? We do MD simulations. Like we're doing this data analysis, we build a Markov state model using this AI agent. That's something I think my group started to work on, and I'm excited about that myself. And of course, there's always a validation step. You have to make sure the results are correct.
Yeah, it's a danger that we're gonna skip the validation step altogether when we get used to the fact that it mostly gets it right. Eventually, if it's like 95% correct, we're going to say, oh, it's basically 100% correct.
I think there's always two camps. One camp of people think the large language model are better to serve as a co-pilot, right? We help you write the code, just provide input, but you still write the code, validate yourself. Another camp is you want everything to be automated. You have the closed loop. You don't even have human in the loop. You just pile together like tiny different agent. Then you can start doing things that can generate design of proteins or antibodies. So still I think there's debate between the two camps.
Definitely. Relating to what Robert said, I think there's a great case for debugging and maybe documenting scientific software, which is something that doesn't necessarily write the code itself, but can signal a lot of issues and improve the experience of interacting with the code because people can still review what is created and make sure that it makes sense. But there's so much undocumented or poorly written code in academia, and I've certainly contributed my share to that. And that maybe this is going to be like deploying these agents on academic, let's say, repositories without letting them modify things, but just signaling things, making, pull requests, whatever.
Yeah. If you're just writing an API documentation, I think would be something that it could do very well. Writing more user-friendly documentation, could also be then.
People also talk about writing machine-friendly documentation now, right? So that someone who asks, how can I use this software, can actually get advice from GPT on using this software. Sonya, any experiences on your side in that regard?
I think I have like somewhat similar experiences, using it to help a bit with code. I'm also curious if it's going to be used to, there's certain codes that are quite old and maybe, as hardware improves, the codes themselves, don't really improve. So, and maybe the developers have gone on to something else and they still barely work, but are still maybe heavily used just because they do work. So I think it'll be interesting to see kind of if there's some sort of growing usability of existing code out there. that, yeah, often is maybe written by a graduate student that moved on, but is still used by the community because it works.
Portability also
but I think also,
updates those things.
yeah, exactly. Updating and just looking at simple GitHub issues that, an AI could answer. It will be interesting to see how it's used. I don't know if academia is maybe as up to date as industry in those sorts of things. Where I don't have a good sense of like how industry is maybe using AI for that kind of thing. But I don't know. I find myself, while it's like there's reason to be optimistic for how AI can help us with like writing codes or agents to do something like building a Markov state model. I think you mentioned earlier kind of the different generations and different experiences with this. I think there is a concern of like education, and like for us, we kind of went through and had to do all these things by hand. And so we know very viscerally like what can go wrong and what needs to happen correctly. But I think for, students and postdocs who like don't develop that experience, is there something that's gonna be now like not there in the training that could eventually lead to problems and mean like that the people in the next generation of group leaders, like, it's hard for them to troubleshoot certain problems because they're just used to the AI solving all their problems for them. I don't know. So I think there's big questions there. And I think maybe Xuhui also can comment. Like, I find myself very worried when it comes to like how people are developing as writers. Because I think a lot of people use ChatGPT as like a tool to help with writing, but I think like the process of editing and going through things over and over again manually is also like a big learning process.
Structuring your thoughts
that I think will also be, yeah.
I agree. I think in terms of education, that's a big problem. In general, I think graduate students or postdocs, they develop intuition, right? By doing many low-level tasks like writing code, running simulation, processing data. That's very important for them to formulate, to get familiar with what's going on in the field. But if this all replaced by AI, then that could be an issue, I think. I will still keep at least some of this component in my own lab, at least to help train the students, in parallel with AI. I think in the future, another thing I'm thinking about, in the future, what we need, right? So maybe the most valuable skills may shift from the running simulation, writing code, executing tasks, to thinking, right? Thinking clearly about the problem, formulate the right questions, design the approach, or critically evaluating the results, right? I don't know. So these abilities relies more on the logic reasoning and the conceptual understanding rather than technique execution. There's always a balance. So it's still hard to tell at this moment. That's my feeling.
True. I think the biggest challenge for me when I use AI tools is losing this kind of situational awareness, this mental model of what the tool that you created is exactly doing under the hood, right? Because like when you created it, you know how it operates. And when you didn't create it yourself, it's really, really hard to figure out what's going wrong when it's going wrong, or what could even go wrong. It's like this mental model of what you're working with is going to be important to retain. That's my guess here. There are for sure ways to do that, but they're not going to be automatic. People just fully rely on AI. Then that matches your experience.
It seems like it's going to be a general issue, like for all AI, where it's replacing some task we did before, like, are we going to maintain that expertise, or will our brains just turn to jelly or something?
It's going to be tough.
Well, I would think that's not only applied to computational biophysics, but also applied to many other fields, right? That's a general problem of society.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right. So I wanted to stay a little bit on the topic of education of young researchers. Do you think now that we are kind of having a broader view, thanks to all the data, all the insights, are we really creating, new researchers who have a bird's eye view of the field? Should we actually do that? Maybe should we give people a broader view of biology, a kind of more, as we already discussed, multi-scale or integrative view of biophysics? Or is it kind of fine for people to go deep into every like corner defined by every new method that is, popping up every once in a while? Like every time there's a new tool, people being experts on AI prompting or AlphaFold 3 and so on. How is this balance going to evolve, in your opinion?
I guess I do feel that it's more accessible now for like a PhD student to be able to do both computational and experiment. Like in cryo-EM and crystallography, for example, there's Model Angelo, which helps a lot with model building, which used to be incredibly time consuming. And now, it's still something you have to monitor manually, but at least it's cut the time down a lot there and then opens up, for students to learn maybe some more computational methods during that same time period. I think it's very interesting. And I also think there's like a lot more like experimentalists, I think, respect computational methods a lot more now. I don't know
Because
if you guys
things
have
work.
this same experience. Well, yeah,
Definitely
things are
definitely better than 20 years ago.
Yeah. Well, the methods are better than 20 years ago also. So it's- yeah. Well,
Yeah, people are definitely coming more to ask for help with something that they want to figure out. That's also my
Yeah,
impression.
I definitely think that, compared to when I was a student, there are more students doing interdisciplinary work, whether it's using multiple computational techniques or maybe doing experiments as well. So, I don't know what the students themselves would say, but I think that, I think that it is more interdisciplinary than it used to be.
I think from the education perspective, I think the next generation of computational biophysicists have to be multilingual. At least I would think about 3 pillars. The first one will be the statistical mechanics, physics theory. The second one is data science, machine learning. The third one is biology. I would very much hope the student have exposure to all these 3 components before they dive into a specific field, like you mentioned. Maybe doing metadynamics, doing the Markov state. So then they get a comprehensive training and they form their own way to think about things, and that will be pave the way to become an independent researcher. But that may require students taking a slightly larger number of the graduate courses and participating in some other training workshops, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I was always thinking, how to integrate the person who is, for example, a great specialist in AI but has no idea about physics or biology, right? In a computational biophysics group, because there has to be this shared vocabulary at least for people to be able to translate.
Yeah. I want to comment on that. That's a very good point. I think I want to just spin this other way around. Then if we have the biologists know nothing about machine learning, how do they get into the field? So while I developing this machine learning chemistry class, I realized a lot of the biologists, if they want to take computer science courses for machine learning, many times they get confused about the mathematical background and the theories. And they probably want a course tailored for biologists or for chemists for learning machine learning. They want to have conceptual understanding and some practical experience of, for example, building up your own convolutional neural network, recurrent neural network. So this kind of coursework, I think is also important in the future. We need to develop courses targeting people from different fields. That's my own take.
Right, because everything is available with language models, for example, but not everything is in your mental latent space, so to say.
In your language, yes.
Yes.
But there's always room for people who want to go very narrowly into, very deeply into a certain area. And then, as long as they talk to other people that know more about other things, then there can be some benefit for it all.
Yeah, there's definitely something to be said in favor of deep expertise. But as you say, very often it might go too deep into not communicating with the rest of the world, and that's the thing to avoid.
Yeah.
I think definitely different fields can have different languages sometimes. And I think obviously deep research is good, but I think sometimes, if you're somebody who can kind of speak the 2 languages of 2 different fields, there's a big opportunity to kind of find low-hanging fruit in between them and really do a lot of really cool stuff. So I think it'll be interesting to see if more interdisciplinary people existing will kind of generate some new cool ideas.
Or just more conferences. Who knows which way. No, but I'm certainly thinking of myself as a person in the middle, and I always appreciate the people who actually have, this deep expertise, but also can tell me something new about things. So I'm happy to see both branches grow. But then as we're speaking about the languages developing internally or, between the fields, how do you see different fields or subfields redeveloping their own languages? I'm thinking of what are the approaches to generating new golden standards, best practices, and teaching as the new methods become popular. I think a lot of our standards from maybe a decade ago have to be deeply updated. And are we doing a good job as a community in actually defining those new standards, those new best practices?
Unfortunately, I don't think our field is doing a great job on that. I don't know if other panelists agree with me on that. So a couple of examples I'm thinking, like 20 years ago at a Terrorai workshop, people are talking about developing the benchmark systems for developing the Finergy method, right? You have all different kind of Finergy methods, but that hasn't been realized yet. Now, in our community, we've been talking about having this benchmark data set for the development of the kinetic models, like Markov state model, like milestoning and the weighted ensemble, but seems we haven't move forward too much along that direction either. This is something I personally think we should spend more effort for our field to develop.
We had one podcast episode where we pushed for a general benchmark for free energy methods, and that was probably 2 years ago, and it still hasn't happened. Yes, I fully agree.
So you have similar experience?
Yes, I would love to do that, but I don't have the time. I think everyone else is in the same position.
But yeah, I agree. And I also think that seeing kind of the value of benchmarks to machine learning and the progress there, I think also sort of renews this maybe momentum towards trying to develop these benchmarks for our own field so that like there can be more like concrete advancements and metrics to judge tools by, basically.
One really nice benchmark are these, do shore simulations where they really sample everything by brute force, and you can just see if you can reproduce the results other methods. So
yeah, but those are like 15 years old right now, right?
Well, can anybody run those simulations on their computer? No.
Well, I think this is a very interesting point. I want to expand this a little bit, right? So we all know D. Shaw has done a very good job generating this benchmark data set. They're old, right? 15 years old. Now, I was thinking maybe at least in the United States, the system I'm familiar with, the funding system make it slightly more difficult, right, to really spend a lot of effort doing this kind of boring work, right? Maybe the industry or nonprofit organization should be organize this kind of effort. That's my thinking. I don't know what you guys think. Sonya, you're in the nonprofit.
No, we are thinking this way for sure. So I think it's really a tempting way to go, especially given like resources and the what the field needs. So it's
I just put the D shore simulations out there as an example where at least for some of the earthquake tools they'll be really thoroughly sampled, and it's still not possible for most people to run those simulations on no computational resources. So you'd have to do some kind of enhanced sampling if you wanted to do well.
I think one way in which they are nice is that they are in this kind of relevant scale. It's not a alanine dipeptide or 2D potential, which is always easy to sample with everything, but it touches on this scale, which is relevant for many projects for actual biology. I think we also miss, there's a lot of research going into really big systems, right? From Spike in the COVID era to like all the huge assemblies from cryo-EM that are coming out these days. And there's this big question of like, can we do anything about them? Or is anything that comes out just random noise that came out of the 1 microsecond simulation, right?
So we're talking about reproducibility?
Yeah, kind of. Because a lot of methods are applicable to a lot of systems, but we don't really know what kind of systems they are applicable to. And like, where is the end line, or what is the trade-off between, size and accuracy?
I think this has been brought up in a number of conferences, right? When we talk about benchmark doesn't mean 2D potential alanine dipeptide. We need to have the benchmark for realistic systems, which means we need to run very long simulations and enough sampling, straightforward MB, for complicated conformational change. But that's still something, as Robert mentioned, it's not easy to do. We still have to utilize Hanson sampling or this and that type of algorithm to bridge the gap. But it would be nice if we have that kind of benchmark, right? If someone really spend a lot of resources, effort to generate benchmark for one or two of these kind of systems, then that would be very useful for the community.
Well, I was advocating for symmetry-based benchmarks, where you know that the answer is 0 by symmetry, and you can probably generate quite a few of those. But, well, okay, that's maybe a different question for each one of you, but as I think so often the progress in computational biophysics is driven by experimental developments. And we had many cases where a relatively simple experiment could, push computation quite far. Do you think there are experimental techniques or actual experiments that should be done to push the field forwards quite a bit? Like, what is the best case scenario for an experimental development that would, make your job so much easier in the next 5-10 years?
So I can start. So my group is working on this Markov state modeling. I think the very direct validation or comparison of my data to experiments will be this time-resolved cryo-EM, where you can monitor the protein ensemble as a function of time, right? We get a structure ensemble, then we can directly compare with a simulation result. So that's my wishful thinking. If there are good time-resolved cryo data set, I'll be very happy.
And we're talking like millisecond time scales here, right?
We're talking about millisecond times. Most of the relevant biological conformational changes occur at a millisecond time scale.
And this is also where the technique can
then you would worry about freezing and
yeah, I was going to
what
say
happens
that.
during freezing.
Yeah, I don't know what's the status. Maybe Sonya know more. How far away we are to get a good time resolved cryo-EM data set.
I mean, there are several groups who do time-resolved cryo-EM. I think the issue with a lot of time-resolved techniques, though, is that you get very few particles. So often the data analysis afterwards is still quite tricky. But I think, technically possible, especially if you collect a lot of grids. I think the other thing, there's just, a lot of interesting developments recently as well in terms of, even going down to, tens of microseconds time scales for time-resolved cryo-EM, which is super exciting and relevant to other biological systems. And then one of the problems is that a lot of cryo-EM methods do this plunge vitrification, and kind of how the temperature, not only in the liquid ethane, but above that in this cold air column affects your conformational ensemble is a big question. And there's some very cool work that I saw last year and I think is now out, where they actually just inject the liquid ethane directly on your sample so you don't worry about that and you get very quick freezing. So I think there's a lot of cool stuff going on in cryo-EM to make time-resolved cryo-EM more and more a real tool people can use with a lot fewer question marks around it. But it's still quite tricky to do, I think.
But it's not going to be really time resolved, right? It's going to be a free energy landscape, most in fact, or you're talking about doing the pulse chase kind of experiment where
right,
you
it's coupled with you can do the rapid mixing, you can couple with microflakes or stop flow, right? You can have triggering event, you can monitor the relaxation of the population. It's one thing.
Yeah, so often time-resolved methods will have microfluidics where you combine a protein and its ligand, and then you have longer chambers where they're interacting. And that's kind of the time component, how long it's in kind of this interaction.
It feels like methods that determine kinetics are the most indirect, right? And there's so many factors that can get in the way of interpreting kinetic data.
Yeah.
Do you have any biophysical computational ways of actually getting them into account directly?
Well, Markov state models. Xuhui approves.
No, I'm also thinking of exactly this question of, maybe we should model the whole setup of the cryo-EM liquid ethane plunging, right? And do, I don't know, a sort of continued modeling of heat flow.
Yeah, so we are kind of working on this right now. Right now, we're not doing the continuum model of heat flow, but we're using a thermostat to vitrify samples in a MD system and looking at how the basically the glass phase of water affects the ensemble distribution of the protein. Right now, yeah, so that's an interesting
cool.
study. Right now we find that there's the ensemble isn't hugely perturbed, but we can find some bounds over which it is.
But it could be perturbed on the real. It's like 200K or something where you hit a glass transition, so things can change between 300 and 200 or so much. And you take some, I don't know what the rate of cooling is, but will be.
So what do you guys think that if we don't like freezing, how about liquid phase TEM? Would that be a way we can do time resolve liquid phase TEM? Resolution is not as high as cryo-EM, but people are still working on improving that. Right?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like liquid phase is a little iffy at the moment.
What about NMR? I mean,
NMR is great.
NMR is average, right? So another type of technique we're thinking about is average. Right? NMR, single molecular thread, right? You can further improve the resolution. Maybe that's not a direct comparison with atomistic simulations because you have to do average.
Well, if you time resolve single molecule thread, if the time resolution of either single molecule thread or single molecule pulling experimental other single molecule experiments was improved to the sort of nanosecond timescale, let's say, and that would be a big game changer in terms of comparison with experiment and with the simulation.
Correct.
But in terms of what I think is like the most likely thing, I mean, it's just really development of high throughput microfluidic methods for measuring biophysical properties. That may make a big impact in our field. I mean, in terms of, let's say, providing data to train coarse grain models, for example, or providing kinetic data for putting into whole cell models. I mean, that's definitely stuff that's rapidly developing at the moment and that could make an impact in the next few years.
What properties are you thinking of specifically?
Things like enzyme kinetics, for example, or protein protein interactions, protein nucleic acid interactions. I mean, just the ability to screen thousands of biomolecules against thousands of other biomolecules is something that's becoming possible now. And to do that in a way that's actually, comparable in accuracy to what we would get by doing a careful, conventional experiment in the lab. Having those kind of data available, I mean, of course, people would like to train AI models on them. Great. Somebody can do that. But I think it would also be useful for us and trying to develop, simulation models, Horseplane models, for example.
Is anyone going to complain about RNA not being, crystallizable? Or I don't know what your opinion on that is, but that's another piece of biology that is really challenging to model. I don't know if you have any overlap or any opinions.
Well, for RNA, I think even from the simulation perspective, I think we have a long way to go. Very simple thing of the mechanism concentration-driven RNA folding. Very few force field can capture that. You probably have to go to a very expensive polarizable force field, like amoeba, right? So that will take forever to converge. So still a very challenge for the RNA simulations. That's my feeling.
Sonya, is the cryo-EM community catching up with RNAs?
Well, I mean, the nice thing about cryo-EM, like RNA in cryo-EM, is that there's more contrast for RNA than there is for protein. So in some ways, it makes it easier to do things like analyze an ensemble of RNA, but fact is that RNAs are still very, capturing these conformational ensembles. If you don't have something that you can kind of latch onto and do your pose estimation with in cryo-EM and do your initial angular estimation, it's still very, very tricky to do those analyses. We're trying to develop methods to work towards that. But I think RNA in general is fascinating, right? Like it has... we talk about protein conformational ensembles, but I think for RNA, we're not even, we're just starting to understand kind of what's going on there. And structure prediction are way worse. And, our computational models are way worse, way more expensive.
Yeah, I worry if we even have a mental model for how RNA should behave in the sense of, what is the temporal evolution of an RNA structure that is a generic structure, not just a folded rock solid
hairpin.
So I think the underlying free energy landscape for protein folding versus RNA folding, they're different. I think RNA landscape is very rugged compared to the protein energy landscape. So it will be even more difficult to sample.
I also don't have a strong sense of like how much we know about like evolutionary trends in RNA, how much they tell us about, like for proteins, it's been very valuable to look at like coevolution patterns. But I don't know how much signal there is in RNA. Maybe somebody else here does.
So there is, I don't know, but I'm also curious about that question. There has been a number of the sort of the genomic model, right? The large language model for the DNA has been recently published, like alpha genomics, right? People are looking at, Robert, you're the expert probably on this DNA, chromatin, right? But then the RNA is still different because you have all these splicing and post-transcriptional modification, and how much of the evolution signal has been preserved through that process, or what can we learn from that? That's, I think, it's a very interesting question.
I was just going to say, as far as the coevolutionary information, I mean, there are some cases like specific ribozymes where, they do fold into a specific structure, and there the coevolutionary information can tell you about the structure. But yeah, I mean, in general, because RNAs don't fold into a single structure, it's hard to really, make sense of any coevolutionary information in the way it's done for proteins. So it's not a very general tool like the before. It's a challenging problem. You have a lot of work to do, even at the, we said the atomistic models are the most developed, but of course, RNA, even those are not quite there yet. So
the RNA folding itself is very challenging, but protein-RNA interaction, I think, is relatively simpler. That's my feeling. The transcriptional factor interacting with RNA, I think this field will see the much development in the coming years.
As long as we have a good reference. Okay, let's move up a level and let's wrap up maybe the discussion with what you see as the biggest challenge for the community in the next few years or the next decade in terms of everything scientific. It can be, publishing, it can be reproducibility, it can be, software quality, as we already discussed, or maybe the impact of the fields for biology. And what are your feelings about this?
So I think you touched upon a few points. I still think the purely data-driven model will have its own limitations. I think the biophysics-informed machine learning models, where we combine data with some physics, will be still powerful under the regime where we don't have infinite data. So that's still, I think our field will have impact. And in the challenge, I think, also as you mentioned, how to interpret our model, because there are so much simulation data, very complicated models, right? So another thing would be, how do we make sure the software sustainability, right? We've seen cases where as we talk about, student left the group and the software nobody maintain, and how can we make sure we have the software in the field that can be sustainable? And also the training the interdisciplinary students, as we talk about in the age of the AI and the machine learning or ChatGPT. That's a few things in my mind.
Okay. Sonya?
Yeah, I think incorporating the new with the old is going to be a challenge. So I've heard this anecdote that the number of high resolution structures that have been solved and deposited in the PDB has actually decreased. Like real experimental structures has decreased since AlphaFold came out, despite the fact that, there's still a huge number, like 20% of structures that AlphaFold does not predict very well. And so I think while there's benefits to these new tools, I think not, leaving our old tools behind and continuing to solve these structures that we need to solve that do provide new information that aren't predictable is a very important thing to kind of grapple with in this time. But I also think that, as I mentioned, there's very exciting things going on in cryo-EM just at the experimental level that I think coupled with the new tools will potentially advance us understanding things like kinetics and conformational ensembles much better. I think that's very exciting.
Well, maybe everything that could be resolved to a high resolution has already been resolved. And now we're the challenging ones.
I don't know. I don't believe that. I think there's still work to do.
Okay, but anyway, beware of feedback loops. What you're saying, right? That's
Yeah.
there might be behavioral nudges that make us do unpredictable things in the future just because of the tools that we develop.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's good to have conversations around it and highlight the dangers. Robert?
Oh, and biggest challenge. Yeah, I think, and in showing that mechanistic or physics-based models combined as needed with the AI are, still useful, and as to any this. That's our, I guess, our challenge for the next decade. I mean, I think that they are, but I know that there's going to be opinions to the contrary that we don't need anything beyond just data-driven models. So I think we need to prove ourselves that we can provide useful. I mean, I think we can provide useful information.
Hopefully. Maybe to wrap up, what would be your message to someone who's starting a PhD in computational biophysics this year? Let's say someone who wants to do research, doesn't know where to go yet, but they like computation, they like bioinformatics, biophysics, and
I liked Xuhui's 3 pillars. I thought that was like very insightful. That
I agree.
Let's see if I can repeat them. Right, it was like stat mech and data science and biology, and I think like all 3 of those are kind of different skills that maybe any individual might excel at more or less, but having kind of a solid background in all 3 of those, I think I like that idea.
Yeah.
So I think that will be a good idea if the student entering this field can spend some time, the exposure to the 3 pillars, that will help them to make the informed decisions what they're going to do in the future. So I think that many universities have these rotation programs. The first year, spend more time to expose to different aspects, and then at the end you can make a decision which field you're going to get into. Don't rush. Take your time, be patient.
Great. Thanks. Robert?
And try to think about what are the important problems in the field, I guess. I mean, that's not something a student isn't going to know at the beginning, but as they go through their PhD, they're going to develop a team that to think about
something
that.
to inspire someone as a big challenge. Yeah. What would that be?
Well, I guess you just mentioned one of them, which is, RNA biology is a big challenge. Understanding all RNAs, all interact with their partners. Another one is, I guess, transcription regulation. Does, was the something that's very complex and involves all the different factors, hard to really address by any one method. I think, obviously very important for many things. So on the idea, interesting fall into in the line feature now, and of course, unless we're going in the same direction as transcription regulation. I guess there's the genomic structure, how the structure, how is that regulated?
Okay.
So can I add one point before we wrap? So then we talk about for students entering the field. Now, for the students that are close to the graduation and they're thinking about their future career, I think another point I want to add is there's a lot of the industry companies working on the AI for biophysics, AI for drug discovery, and a lot of these companies are taking this data-driven approach. I think it's a good idea for students to get exposure to that. Maybe they're doing an internship in the companies, and they will help them to make informed decision. What they really want to do in the future after they obtain a PhD. Do they want to work in a company or do they want to move forward in the academia? So that's my experience in recent years. Yeah.
Or maybe we should be the ones starting the companies.
Also, it's not a one-way path necessarily. People often think about that.
But I see the students really are struggling about. They're thinking about what's the best way to go because they're saying these companies in industry, right? They don't really need to know physics. Because everything is data-driven.
That's an interesting point because, we try to highlight many times on the podcast that this is a two-way street that people can go learn and go back. But there's definitely a strong focus on the data science part rather than the biology part or the physics part, right? So, it's one of the 3 pillars that you can definitely develop there. Okay, wonderful. So, Xuhui Huang, Sonya Hanson, and Robert Best, Thank you for talking to me and for exchanging the ideas. And I hope we inspire some young souls going into biophysics. It was a great discussion.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
This was great.
Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you for listening. See you in the next episode of Space Invaders.